This episode of the HVAC School Podcast is made possible by our wonderful sponsors, RectorSeal, Carrier, and Mitsubishi Comfort. And today I wanted to let you know about 3 new products from RectorSeal. The Armor Pad Lightweight Condenser Pad. I've got one sitting right here in my office. Had a chance to check it out. It's very nice lightweight pad. And then also 2 products that come with new delivery methods. That is the Leak Freeze Pro with nanoparticles and Acid Away. And the Acid Away, you're used to, it comes in the bottle and you would have to kind of dump it in the compressor, which was a tough thing to do when you had a burnout, especially if you were going back and you were having an issue trying to remediate the acid condition in a burnout. The new Acid Away, as well as the Leak Freeze Pro with nanoparticles, come in a copper brass container where you can inject it directly into the suction line, which is really nice. So really easy to do. You just use your center hose, use just a touch of high side pressure to force the contents into the system, keeps any contaminants from going into the system, and it's just really nice and easy. And that is the RectorSeal Armor Pad, the RectorSeal Leak Freeze Pro with nanoparticles, and RectorSeal Acid Away.
Meet Zoomlock, the 10-second flame-free refrigerant fitting from Parker. Reduce labor costs by 60% with no brazing, no flame, and no fire spotter. Discover how Zoomlock can help you be more efficient and productive. Visit Zoomlock.com for more information.
And now the man who never leaves the disconnect out or the caps off, Bryan Orr.
Yes, far be it from me to ever make a mistake. I am Bryan Orr, and this is the HVAC School Podcast, the podcast that helps you remember some things that you might have forgot, or helps remind you of some things that you might have forgot to know in the first place about the heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and refrigeration industry. And actually, just the other day, I don't run a whole lot of service calls anymore. I catch a few every once in a while. And I was at home on the weekend the other day, and we got a call for a pool heater right around the corner from where I live. So I said, I'll go ahead and take it. And I brought my oldest son with me. I own the company, so I'm allowed to do that sort of thing. And so I'm just telling you, if that's against your company policy, don't go doing it, because I did it. Do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, so I took my son with me, and he's 16. And so we went to this pool heater, and of course I'm trying to be cool. You know, I'm cool, smart dad, right? And this unit's not coming up, the display isn't on, so I know we have a power issue. And so I look inside, and I can see that we do have some power at the board, but I don't have the diagram out yet because I don't have the full quarter panel off. So I go and turn off what I think is the disconnect for it, because it appears to be the disconnect. It kind of goes down into the ground, and I couldn't tell for sure, but it was the disconnect that was right there. And I go start pulling the quarter panel off, or it's actually just a little side panel on these Hayward gas pool heaters, and the thing starts arcing all over the place. Apparently, I did not have the correct breaker off, which in turn tripped another breaker, but it only tripped half the breaker. So I proceeded to continue to start testing, and then another wire popped off and started arcing some more. So the problem was some loose connections, and I made a fool of myself in front of my son. The point being that you've never been doing it long enough that you don't learn something new. And for me, the learning there was, always double check. Always double check before you start working on high voltage electrical. I know those of you are going to say that's first day of trade school. I know everything's first day of trade school. I get it. But that ties into today's episode, because today's episode is about ego, and also something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we'll get into. And I've got a very special guest, Andrew Greaves. Andrew Greaves is HVAC's funny guy, as well as one of the most organized guys in air conditioning. He has a group all about vehicle layouts. So I think you'll enjoy it. It's a little bit of a different episode. There is no swearing, but there is some bleeping. So if you're the type of person who doesn't want to hear bleeps, then this is not the right podcast for you, because you can imagine maybe some of the words that he's saying. All right, here we go. We're talking about ego with Andrew Greaves. Thank you for joining us in the HVAC School Podcast, Andrew.
Yes, Bryan.
What have you been up to lately?
It's been a very busy last few months here. Just working the day-to-day. Got to go out to AHR, got to meet you finally, and a couple other great people, and just been kind of working on some YouTube stuff, doing some reviews, and just cruising along.
All right, so let's talk quick before we get into the meat and taters of this thing, as we say in the biz. You've got several different things going on. So you got HVAC Comedy. You've got AK HVAC. That's a YouTube channel.
Right.
And then you have the vehicle layouts. And that vehicle layouts, is that just a Facebook page or is that also a YouTube channel?
It is just a Facebook group.
So Andrew is super humble. Like, he just does not like to self-promote, but I want people to at least know what you do day in and day out. So what's your day job look like? What does it consist of?
My real day job outside of the social media stuff, which is purely a hobby, is I'm an HVAC mechanic. I work for an OEM, a manufacturer, as a mechanic. And I work on anything from rooftop equipment to split systems, a lot of VRF. And I don't personally work on the centrifugals much, but we do quite a bit of that as well. And I do a little bit with the air-cooled chillers.
Got it. So it's big stuff. It's not residential, working in grandma's basement kind of stuff. It's commercial, industrial.
No, I've been on that side too, though. So, and I have a lot of respect for both sides of that spectrum.
No, you're special because you work in commercial and industrial, right?
Stop it, Bryan.
You go into a Facebook group and it's literally the first thing out of your mouth. This is a lead-in, Andrew. I'm leading into the conversation that we're going to have, which is about ego. Andrew shared a video with me that I'm not sure that he's ever going to put public. You haven't put it public yet, have you? Are you intending to ever do that?
I did not. It got a little colorful.
It was a humorous look at some of the things that technicians talk about on social media, and I LOL'd quite a bit. There's a lot of LOLing and ROFLing.
You chortled, if I recall.
I did. I chortled. I snickered. Yep. There's a lot of that.
I will say, Bryan, you could totally air the video if you want to bleep it out. It may get the message across without tainting the podcast's image. I'm not sure, though.
Okay. Well, if you're going to give me the right to play it here on the podcast, I will insert a section of it with bleeps inserted, as long as that's okay with you.
100%.
All right. So I've got to set this up. In this video, Andrew is looking down at his phone, sitting in his van, reading a message that clearly somebody else posted on social media.
Commercial guy here. That's all I do. Chillers, commercial, and industrial. Anyway, I don't really ever mess around with that residential stuff. I'm having an issue with my heat pump. Knock yourself down a peg or two, first of all, okay? Be a little bit humble when you come onto these pages, man. I'm in commercial too. I work for an industrial commercial type outfit. At the end of the day, I don't know everything about residential either. But if I am going to ask a question, I'm just going to say, look, I don't know this. I'm not going to put my big commercial on the dashboard here and make sure I let everybody know before I ask a question that I know more than you and I'm superior to you because I work commercial or industrial. Just ask a question. That's what we're here for.
Andrew was just highlighting how some people communicate where they're constantly hedging. Like, you can't just go out there and just say what you don't know and ask a question and not worry about whether or not someone thinks it's stupid. You've got to constantly be hedging your bets. And one of the things was, if you're a commercial and industrial technician and you have a residential question, you have to go out and immediately say that you do commercial and industrial. And this residential stuff there's nothing to it, but you just have a quick question about it for a friend, of course.
It's always a really everyday thing for residential techs, too. It's usually something quite simple, but the residential stuff's below me, right? Look, I don't deal with this resi crap, but can you guys throw me a bone here? I'm at my grandma's house, and I don't know why the furnace won't light.
No. A friend is at their grandma's house, and they can't figure out why it won't light, and you're just helping them out over the phone.
Exactly. That's all it is.
Here's a picture of the nameplate. What is the tonnage of this equipment? Got this picture from, and I'm asking for a friend. No, you're not. You're lying. You're lying. You don't know the answer. Just ask the question. You don't know the answer and you're full of You don't know the answer and you're full of It's not for your friend. It's for you.
And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to title this episode yet, but it's about ego, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and why you can never be transparent as a technician. Otherwise, the Facebook bots are going to attack you or whatever it is. But let's start here, I guess. So it's not like you've been in the trade 30 years. You've come into it within the last decade.
Oh, yeah.
You talked a little bit about some of the different experiences that you had coming up and some good apprenticeship type mentor situations and then some that weren't so good. So let's just start there and just sort of talk about what do you think is the typical experience that most inexperienced technicians, whether they're coming out of school or not, have when they get in a truck for the first time with somebody who's experienced?
Well, if I could backtrack a little bit first to maybe about, 400 to 500 years ago, apprenticeship was vastly different than it is today. If I wanted to be a cobbler, I went when I was 8 years old to go live with the cobbler, like literally just go to his house and stay there till I'm 21. And then I'm a cobbler. That was one end of the extreme. And you were one-on-one. You also cleaned their house, made food, and then learned to fix shoes on the side there. You fast forward to today, and unfortunately, it seems that most business models don't support the same kind of one-on-one mentorship that you maybe even had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. A lot of the kind of senior guys now, when they came up, they did do a full apprenticeship with another individual, and they rode with them every day, no matter what the call was. Guys are getting kind of thrown by the seat of their pants out into the world a lot quicker, and it's kind of a sink or swim. That's not the business people's fault. It's just the reality, I think, of today, at least in many areas of the country, Brian. I don't know if it's different for you.
Well, you say it's not the business's fault, but it is in some cases. I think a lot of what's happened is this disconnect in between what management believes is happening and what actually is happening in the field. Like, that's something that I noticed, that cognitive dissonance, as they call it in the highbrow world, and cognitive dissonance is occurring all the time. And when I worked at my first job, I remember riding along with techs and then sitting down in tech meetings, and the things they would say in tech meetings were exactly opposite of what was going on in the field. So they would talk using micron gauges and proper nitrogen pressurization and all this. And all the while, I'm sitting in the van and guys are venting refrigerant and using R22 to pressure test equipment. And there was just no congruence between what was being said from management and what was being done in the field. And I kind of got the realization as I became a manager that everybody at the top kind of knows, but they just sort of wink and nod and don't do anything about it because of what that means to their business models. That's sort of a dark look at the underbelly of the industry. It's not always that way, but I sense that has a big reason why it is the way it is.
Sure. Letting guys out there on their own too quickly without proper mentorship is kind of breeds that confidence skill disconnect, I think, because you'll have a guy out there for a few years. And again, I mentioned sink or swim. Even a lot of your guys that swim may do so by the skin of their teeth, and they're actually getting equipment to run and move on. But who's to tell them that they did it wrong? They may have got it running, but are their practices poor? Now they're learning and adapting each time, hopefully, but I see a lot of opportunity for it to breed a certain kind of tech that is overly confident because they managed to get the job done without help over the years. And I think it creates issues down the road.
Let's try to get to the root of this, because this is something that I think is interesting. And so I might lose some of you here because I'm actually going to read something off of the interwebs here. When I first found out about this, and I'm trying to remember where I think it was actually a podcast. I'm certain it probably was a podcast. I listened to way too many podcasts. But I learned about this cognitive bias is what it's called. It's just a way of being, a way of thinking that causes you to be, at the very least, inaccurate and at the most highly dangerous out there working in the field. And it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that's just named after the people who first studied it. And so I'm just going to read the Wikipedia definition of this, and hopefully you'll all not fall asleep, but I think it's pretty interesting. So in the field of psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias wherein people of low ability suffer from illusory superiority, mistakenly assessing their cognitive ability as greater than it is. The cognitive bias of illusory superiority derives from metacognitive inability of low-ability persons to recognize their own ineptitude. Without self-awareness of metacognition, low-ability people cannot objectively evaluate their actual competence or incompetence, which is a super fancy way of saying that there's a lot of people who are so bad, meaning that they're not bad, but of such low skill that they can't even know when they don't know something. And I'm not trying to criticize like anyone individually because that would be rude, of course. But I think we can all agree, those of us who were able to hang in there through that description that I just read, it can recognize that that is a significant problem in this trade, both in those who are giving mentorship and those who are receiving it, and even in places where there is no mentorship at all. So is that something you've experienced, and what are some examples of that you can think of?
It's definitely something I've experienced. And so basically, again, after that was a very official definition of the Diego Kendrick effect. That's what it's called, right?
Dunning-Kruger.
Okay, Dallas Kingsley effect. So if we distill that a little bit further, it's basically just saying that your ignorance is protecting you from an awareness of your own ignorance. And you just don't even know it. I think I've probably encountered that, but it's just as often you encounter the inflated ego of somebody that it's a faux ego. And it's because a lot of times they know that they don't know, but they have to give off an impression because maybe, say, they've been in the field so long, it would be unthinkable for them to acknowledge maybe not fully understanding an issue. And I think that's something that I've encountered much more often than this Derek Colton effect, per se.
Here's where I see both, and tell me if you see this. I see this sort of Dunning-Kruger effect a lot more from people who maybe have just come into the field from school, or probably millennials at large. You're probably a millennial too. I'm right on the edge of it, of being a millennial.
I am a millennial.
Dyed in the wool?
Yes. I'm 32, so I think it puts me right there in the beginning of that range. I think 85 was when Wikipedia says, yes, I've Wikipedia'd millennial.
Okay. Well, you did do a video on it.
Yes, it was research.
I think it's more likely for millennials, those who legitimately have very little experience, to suffer from that, where they think that because they have some book knowledge that they really know what they're doing. I think we've all worked with somebody like that, where they're just kind of spouting things, but their ability to execute on what it is that they're spouting is missing or lacking or totally absent. Whereas I think you're right, the inflated ego piece that you see, and so imagine in your mind, those of you who are listening, just close your eyes and imagine in your mind the old-timer who I'm sure you worked with that everybody knew wasn't that great of a technician, but would always tell everyone, I've been doing this for 20 years, or I've been doing this for 30 years, or whatever the case may be, but they still had a hard time diagnosing low-voltage electrical problems, or whatever the case may be, and yet they kind of fall back on their experience. I think that's more likely that you don't know, but you're kind of embarrassed about it, and so instead you just hang on with dogged determination to your ego instead of just admitting that, yeah, I really don't know this.
Absolutely, and that's a perfect caricature of my first kind of mentor in the trade. And he was just that type. And the recovery machine was a blue rag from the supply house. And I never saw the vacuum pump. Just unbelievable things that you couldn't imagine today with the importance we've been putting on proper practice these days online. But unfortunately, we don't pick our mentors. Sometimes guys don't have the option to jump around and look for that. It's in those times where you have to, unfortunately, just take a lot more upon yourself to do more outside of work for yourself. You need to, instead of absorb what he's doing and make it reflect in your own work, you need to mark it in your brain as things you'll never do and use it as an example of what you want to be the anti of. It's not the ideal way to go through it, but sometimes guys don't have a choice. And unfortunately, what you risk doing if you don't make sure to cut that stuff out of your knowledge base is repeating this cycle. And when you come up into your own, you'll have such huge holes. Your experience will be just Swiss cheese. And that's what you'll have to pass back on to the apprentice that ultimately ends up riding with you. At some point here, if you don't mind, I know we all had to just listen to Bryan's Wikipedia entry, but I have a quick story I could tell too. It kind of illustrates perfectly.
Is it a legend?
Yes, it's a tale of old.
Okay, of yore. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I've been waiting for a tale of yore.
There was once an old-timer who was charged with teaching an apprentice a thing or two. The apprentice was young and eager to learn, and it seemed though there was so much to learn back then. One day, when they were working together, the apprentice looked over the old-timer's shoulder out of honest curiosity and asked, "Why are we doing it that way?" The answer came back like a slap in the face. "What's your point?" the old-timer asked, narrowing his eyes. The young apprentice didn't know what to say. The old-timer had turned on him so quickly. "What do you mean?" the apprentice finally asked, backing up a step. "I mean, what's your point? Are you trying to say that there's a better way to do it? Are you questioning what I'm trying to teach you here, kid? Huh?" The apprentice looked at his shoes and said nothing. The old-timer nodded slowly to himself and said in a very deliberate way, "We do it that way, kid, because I say so. Do you understand?" The apprentice quickly nodded, not sure what he had said wrong, but making the moment in his memory. This would never happen to him again, ever. "Now, do you have any more dumb questions?" the old-timer asked. The apprentice shook his head. "Can we get back to work now?" He nodded, saying nothing. "Thank you," the old-timer spat out, turning back to his work. As the years went by, the apprentice grew in experience, but he never did get that solid base of knowledge that he needed to be better than average. He always hesitated to ask questions. Before long, the people around him just assumed he knew things. The trouble was he didn't, and he always worried that somebody would find out. So when he was asked a question that made him uncomfortable, he would often answer with a steely-eyed question of his own. "What's your point?" he'd say. And that's the story, Brian.
I'm feeling emotional.
Well, you know what? It touched me too, right there. Believe it or not, that came out of the back of a Bell & Gossett hydronics components manual. I don't know why, but I thought that was really cool, and I kind of picked that up and always kind of waited for an opportunity to tell it. So you've done that for me.
Wow, this is a big deal. I appreciate that. That's a really good story, and I think it's something that most technicians who've worked in the field have experienced in one way or another. I was very blessed to have the guy who largely apprenticed me. I've mentioned his name many times, Dave Barefoot. I just had a chance to talk to him. He actually called me on the cell phone right before I was going to present the Rector Seal Profit at AHR, and I had to kind of cut the conversation short, but I hadn't talked to him in probably 5 or 6 years. He has some health issues and stuff, but he was the opposite, where he always took the opportunity to explain things in depth, even if in some cases he didn't always practice the best things himself at all times. I witnessed a few things, even working with him, but he always told me if it wasn't the right way of doing it, he was always kind of bad-mouthing his own practices, which is sort of the other side of the spectrum.
That's great, at least, that he had that ability to acknowledge that. It was either King George III or Morgan Freeman, I think, that said, if somebody corrects you and you feel offended, then you have an ego problem. So, and the fact that he was open to being corrected or maybe even acknowledging his own shortcomings, that's a positive.
It's a slippery slope because you get a lot of kids who come out of school who get the idea that when I say do things the right way, that I'm giving them a ticket to question everything that they're taught. So even the most egotistical old-timer who really doesn't know the fundamentals, they still have some things you can learn from them. I mean, like you mentioned, sometimes it's just not how not to do things, obviously, but then there's the other side of you can learn best practices as far as the physical execution of the job, the actual mechanical assembly and disassembly of things from someone like that, even if they don't fully understand what it is that they're doing, because there is some experience that comes with just time. But for somebody who's coming into it, you can't, A, be a jerk to people who have been doing it for 20 years, like they always tell you. But on the other hand, you can't just take it for what it is. You have to understand it yourself. And that's where this idea in the long, boring explanation of Dunning-Kruger or Dancing Kingsley or whatever it was.
Daryl Khrushchev, yeah.
Right. The long and boring description there talks about metacognition. And metacognition is just the ability to think about what you're thinking about. So an example would be, I'm sure you've done this before, Andrew, where there's been times in my career, especially in teaching, where someone's asked me a question and I've just spouted the first thing that pops into my head. And I wasn't intentionally giving out misinformation, but I wasn't being fully intentional about making sure that what I was saying was correct. Have you ever done that before?
Yep, just kind of an impulse answer, right.
And maybe it's something that you either thought or maybe it's something that you just came up with on the spot, but you don't want to look stupid, so you just spit out an answer. Metacognition is the recognition when as soon as it leaves your mouth that what you just said wasn't well thought out. That is a sign of metacognition. So if you find yourself saying things and just always believing your own marketing or always believing the thing that you're saying without ever considering, wait a second, is that actually true? Let me look that up. That's a response that smart people have to even things that they say are their own mistakes. It's like, that didn't work out quite the way I thought it would. Let me do some more research and see why it worked out the way it did instead of the way I thought it did. That's an example of metacognition, and that's how you dig your way out of either the severe ego or the Dunning-Kruger effect of just your incompetence leading you to believe that you are competent. So I like what you said there. So if somebody corrects you and it upsets you or you have an emotional reaction to it, then that's a sign that you have a, how did you put it?
If somebody corrects you and you feel offended, that may be a good indication to yourself that you may need to check your ego. You shouldn't automatically take offense and assume that if you're questioned that it's the other person that has an issue. You need to be open to that at every point throughout your career. It was Rosa Parks or Channing Tatum that once said that egotism is the anesthetic that dulls the pain of ignorance.
You are killing me. Did you write down a whole list of these? Do you literally have a whole list of these? You do.
No, I am a student of history, Brian. I had the cobbler's story ready, right? I am a student of history. Now, I may not always remember the exact person,
Okay.
but I'll get close within a century. So,
Okay.
well, that's metacognitance, right?
Metacognitives, yeah. In real life, just so you're all aware, Andrew is a much more imposing character in real life than I thought he would be. Because in all your videos, you're kind of like this, I don't want to say a clown because that doesn't sound very nice, but you're a funny guy, right? And then in person, he's got this gigantic beard and enormous bulging muscles. I think he rubbed baby oil all over himself. He was shirtless when he walked in, about 7 foot tall. At least that's how I remember it.
It's funny that sometimes I give that impression off. My boss just said to me the other day that I was starting to intimidate customers. It came as a shock to me, and I ended up just staring at him until he apologized. But it's just things like that. I don't see it in myself. So
Right.
It's always interesting to hear.
You don't see it in yourself. You just see it in the eyes of others as you're staring unblinkingly with teeth bared.
Yeah, right. Normal stuff. Yeah.
And actually, I'm working on a course right now that I'm going to put up on Udemy, which is like a online. You can get courses for all kinds of different things, and there's no HVAC courses, so I'm going to do one there. And this is sort of the first thing that I wanted to address is this idea of ego and lack of metacognition. And of course, it's not something, you either have it or you don't in one sense, but I think we are all on a spectrum because I can look back at things that I was so confident about. Like I felt so friggin' smart when I started the training curriculum for the first company I worked at when I was, 22 or whatever. And I look at that stuff now and I'm like, how on earth could I have ever done that? And at the time, I felt so confident. So I think there is a spectrum there where we can all sort of recognize that there's growth and maybe help others to see it in a way that's actually helpful. And it isn't disrespectful. I don't think any of this has to be done in a disrespectful manner. But one thing that I have noticed is that there are organizations that breed this sort of thing. And I wanted to talk about that quickly because one thing that I've noticed is that we'll hire people, and we'll hire people who have 15, 20, 25 years of experience, and they come in and they're working with people who have worked at Kalos for 5 years, 6 years, 4 years, and there's no comparison in what they're able to do. And it's like consistent. We've had organizations where that's happened consistently. And the only thing that I can think occurs, and tell me if you think this is wrong, but I think when leadership has these traits within an organization, then it scares and intimidates everyone, all the rank and file, everybody who actually does the work, into never bringing things up for fear of threatening the leader in some way. Is that something that you've seen or that you think might be a factor in this?
When you say the leaders, are you talking about the senior technicians at that organization?
I think it starts more like service managers, installation managers, just more of the management and supervisory level.
I haven't personally had it at that level just because in my personal experience, haven't worked at a company where the service manager and up had actually been technicians. So it was always kind of a different dynamic for me. I always got that type of intimidation factor of not wanting to bring up questions to the senior techs.
Yeah, I guess wherever the source of the technical expertise stems from, I guess that would be the point of origination there.
Correct. More like a foreman, that kind of level.
Right. I've seen it on construction sites for sure. Like you have a superintendent who's super like machismo and functions by threatening and swearing and all that sort of thing, but can't really pick up a tool and really do it well themselves. You always get that sense. Not always, but I've gotten that sense on a lot of job sites. And I think that breeds the same sort of behavior. Like somebody who's a thoughtful, hardworking, intelligent person is only going to work under that type of leadership for so long before they're going to scoot, and then that organization is going to be left with a bunch of clones of that leader. It just seems like I've noticed that, and I guess to me the encouragement there is that if you are the type of person who really, you're not perfect, but you want to get better, then maybe find a place to work that actually values that versus beats you down for asking a question or for maybe encouraging an improvement. Because I see a lot of cases, I've talked to a lot of techs who work places and kind of hang with jobs where their sense is that the whole industry is that way. They're like, oh, this is just how it is, and I'm just the exception to the rule. I guess my encouragement there is maybe it's just the place you're working, and maybe it isn't that way everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's more of a geographical thing, Brian. There are areas that it seems like whole swaths of a whole state are in the same mindset on certain issues. And you'll find that this kind of do things right revolution that you and other people have spearheaded on the social media horizon in the last year or two, it's unique to a lot of us to see it. because there's such a concentration of that online, and then you go back to real life, and at least some of us, you don't see that reflected in the workspace. I think it's a geographical thing, because it's certainly like that in my area. A lot of emphasis isn't put on a lot of the things that you and other people are emphasizing and changing as far as practices.
If you're a technician who finds yourself in that position where you want to make that, either you are already the one who is pursuing excellence, doing things the right way, or you realize that you're not. So you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I get it. I don't do things the right way. I don't do them a way that's conducive to quality, but I want to move that direction. But is there anything that comes to mind of how to manage that or how to move in the right direction?
It all comes down to yourself at that point. If you're not going to be supported by the employer that you're currently with, then you either have to move on or take it upon yourself outside of work. And it's an investment that you have to put into yourself. I've talked about that before in some other videos. Without trying to rehash the whole video on here, essentially it takes 3 different types of learning. It takes the hands-on stuff that you can only learn by doing it hands-on. They're the things that you're going to get from books and literature, multimedia, and consume that way. And then there's the third type, which is the things that only from years of repetition will you become competent. And only through marrying all 3 of those in a balanced way are you going to probably achieve that perfection you're looking for, which there's no such thing, but you know what I'm saying? The goal, right? To be an above average technician. So it's a journey to get there. And if you feel like you've already reached that destination, then you probably need to check yourself and see why you feel that way. It was, I think, Sir Winston Churchill or the Cash Me Outside, How About That Girl, that once said that an ego trip is actually a journey to nowhere, Bryan. So it's not worth having that confidence in yourself before it's time. You need to stay humble, and you need to look for the next thing around the corner.
I think it was was it Mahatma Gandhi or was it Kendrick Lamar who said, stay humble, bleep?
Oh, it was Kendrick.
That was Kendrick? Oh, yeah. Okay. Just checking. All right. Well, good stuff. So go ahead and give us a plug for all of your different online jazz. How can people find the great and imposing, monstrous Andrew Greaves on the interwebs?
Well, there's HVAC Comedy. That's on YouTube and Facebook. That's just a couple skits I threw together last year before I kind of learned a quick lesson that you have to learn to pace yourself when you make those types of videos, or you run out of ideas temporarily and then you end up on a hiatus. So that's where I'm at with that now. HVAC Vehicle Layouts is a great Facebook group. It's just a community for people to share storage solutions and organizational tips and tricks, photos of the layouts, and AK HVAC. And that's just a more serious YouTube channel where I do kind of pep talks for apprentices and some tool reviews and tech tips, stuff like that. So that's about all going on with me, Bryan.
All right. Well, cool, Andrew. Thank you for doing this today on the podcast. Every once in a while, it's like I'm talking on the podcast, and then all of a sudden I go into like corporate sales mode at the end. So I'm going to try not to do that. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing what you do. I appreciate you. And it was a pleasure meeting you. I have to say, of all the people who I met at the AHR Expo, you were in my top 47 of just salty earth human being.
That sentiment is going to leave a lasting impression with me, and it means the world, Bryan.
Okay. All right, man. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, bud. Talk to you later.
Hey, thanks for listening to the HVAC School podcast and all the great podcasts of the Blue Collar Roots Network, which you can find by going to bluecollarroots.com. That's bluecollarroots.com. If you're not signed up yet for our daily tech tip emails, you can do that by going to hvacrschool.com. We're actually working on something new right now, which is a forum, but it's kind of a different forum than what you've seen before. It's a forum that's really designed for Q&A and technical discussion. We're going to try to heavily moderate it and also make it nice to use on both mobile and desktop devices. Should be a really good thing. I'm excited about it, and you'll be able to find that at hvacschoolforum.com here very shortly. Doing some testing on it now. So, as always, thank you. And instead of a stupid dad joke, I'm going to let you listen to a couple more of Andrew's pet peeves that you're not going to get unless you're in some Facebook groups and pages online that relate to HVAC. There's a lot of them. Ours is one of them, the HVAC School group. There's some consistent themes that come up, and Andrew apparently has a pet peeve against some of those.
best work boots. Red Wing or Doc Martens. And go. That's 2 in 1. Okay, first of all, who gives a what kind of boots I like? You go to the boot store, try out a bunch of boots, and walk out with the pair that feels great. Because you know what? At the end of the day, you're going to be buying a pair next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and for the next 30 years. You got 30 times to buy and try different kinds of boots. And you can walk around in the store, and you can talk to somebody who actually works with boots every day, and there's your answer. And go at the end. Yeah, because we're all sitting here like golden retrievers with the dog biscuit on our nose, right? Chomping at the bit, waiting for you to finish your question. So you can say, and go, and we're all we're gonna eat the dog biscuit because we're just dying to get started on answering your question because it was so great. It was so enlightening and important because we're all just here for you. I gotta get home and post a picture of me holding a beer so I can go on Pro Talk and say HVAC related because me sitting in the van on the clock paid for it.
Thanks for listening. We will talk to you again next time on the HVAC School Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the HVAC School Podcast. You can find more great HVACR education material and subscribe to our short daily tech tips by going to hvacrschool.com. If you enjoy the podcast, would you mind hopping on iTunes or the podcast app and leave us a review? We would really appreciate it. See you next week on the HVAC School Podcast.